This happened to me a few years ago at work. At that time, the company I was working for had a lot of negative things occur, and it just wasn't a really good time to be working there. They were making one delivery mistake after another, mistakes that shouldn't have been occurring in the first place. There were many accidents that happened in the workspace, and they were getting complaints non-stop. From the time I got to work until I'd clocked off at midnight, I was constantly dealing with these phone calls and bowing and apologizing non-stop. Our stress levels were through the roof. That day, it was already past 3 a.m. when I locked the office door and walked out into the hallway. I was with 4 others: Onishi, the director, Nishikawa, the chief of department, and 2 other employees. We were all exhausted from the day. Our complexion was pale as we walked out of the office in silence. We got to the elevators, and to our dismay, the elevators didn't budge even when we pressed the button. As if this day couldn't get any more stressful. We didn't know, but the elevators were shut off this night due to maintenance work. This notification had gone to all other offices in the building, but for some reason it never made it to ours. It pissed all of us off. We hit the doors, kicked it, yelled at it. After thrashing out like immature children, one of my co-workers, Sugiyama, just plopped down onto the floor as if his battery had run out. "There's nothing we can do. We're going to have to take the emergency stairs," Onishi said. This was the only way out of the building. To prevent vandals from entering the building, the doors on each floor were locked from the inside. Rarely anyone used the stairs, and it was my first time to open and see what was beyond the door. We walked down the hallway and turned the corner. The door to the stairs was dimly lit because the hallway lights barely reached it. The green exit sign was glowing above it. If you've ever worked in an area crowded with office buildings, then you know that there are blind spots at the back and in between buildings that can't be seen from the main streets. These blind spots are narrow walkways surrounded by walls of neighboring buildings, and even on sunny afternoons, it's a dark and damp place. Our office is on the 7th floor, and because I was at the very front, I unenthusiastically opened the door. As soon as the heavy door opened, I smelled something foul which immediately made me start coughing. The handrails, the stairs, everything was covered in a white, waxy substance, and the smell was emanating from it. It was so strong that you could almost see the smell. One of my female co-workers, Nakata, said, "This is all pigeon shit." She sounded like she was about to cry. The back of the building was covered in pigeon nests, and if we tried to breathe normally from our nose, it felt like our lungs would collapse. I put my fear from the dark stairwell on the back burner and started to slowly walk down the stairs. The steel strips to make the stairs slip-proof made a slight clanging noise as we made our way down. I was still leading the way, and behind me was my co-worker Nakata. Then my other co-worker, Sugiyama, followed by Onishi, and finally Nishikawa. The stairwell was so dark and we were all exhausted, so we went down the stairs at a slow pace and in silence. When we passed the 6th floor, I started hearing whispering from behind me. It wasn't anything creepy. It was the sort of whispering you might do when you're at the movies and you're talking to your friend in a hushed tone. When I heard it, I immediately thought that Onishi and Nishikawa, the 2 at the very back, just started talking to each other. But something was weird. The whispering continued and didn't stop even for a second the whole time we were making our way down. In fact, the whispering was only coming from one voice and no one else seemed to be replying to it. The more I listened to it in silence, the more my back started to feel cold. And then it hit me. I've heard this voice before, but I couldn't remember whose voice it was. One thing was for sure though, it wasn't any of ours. The voice continued to whisper. It sounded like a middle-aged man. It sounded a bit depressed and was saying something in a rhythmic pattern, almost like it was saying some sort of prayer. It sounded so familiar. My heart rate picked up and I stopped and turned around. Nakata looked at me as if nothing was wrong. I tried to look at the three behind her, but it was too dark and I couldn't see their faces. I turned back around and continued to go down the stairs, but this time I quickened my steps. I almost slipped on the bird shit a few times, catching my balance by holding on to the handrails. We passed the 5th floor and then the 4th. That's when I heard it. Someone started to laugh behind me. It wasn't the same voice that had been talking this entire time. It was actually the chief of department, Nishikawa. It was actually her voice, not a ghost or anything like that. But as soon as I heard the laughter, I felt like someone had poured a cold bucket of water on me. My back was drenched with sweat. Nishikawa was known around the office to be quite strict and scary. She was good at her job, but she always looked grumpy at work. I'd never seen her smile once. And now this person was laughing. And it was a creepy laugh at that. She sounded like a small child that was giggling at something funny. And in between the laughter, I could hear the man's voice continuing to whisper. Just as before, he sounded depressed, and although I couldn't make out exactly what this man was saying, it definitely didn't sound light-hearted nor funny. And yet, I could hear Nishikawa giggling in response. This back and forth continued for a bit, and when the man's whispering stopped for a second, I stopped walking. I could hear Nishikawa's voice as clear as day. She was trying to hold back her laughter, and she said, Hey, Onishi. Onishi replied, What is it? Who are you talking to? He sounded completely oblivious to what was going on. He shouldn't answer. He shouldn't turn around. But I guess he did, because him and Nishikawa started whispering to each other. Nakata, who was right behind me, banged on the handrails impatiently to get me moving again. It didn't feel like she felt the same fear I was feeling. I couldn't move my legs. I was shaking so badly, and we were all at a standstill. After a while, I heard what I was fearing for the most. Onishi's laughter. He was trying to hold it back just like Nishikawa was and trying to get Sugiyama's attention. Hey, Sugiyama, hey! I could hear Onishi's happy voice. Hey, Nakata and Takase too. Takase is my name. He was trying to get all of our attention. I could feel Nakata's hesitation. No, don't turn around. I wanted to tell her, but my throat was so dry that I couldn't let out a sound. Don't turn around, don't turn around. I continued to repeat these words in my head, and I started going down the stairs again. I started to hear Nakata and Sugiyama whispering to each other. I tried not to listen and hurried down. The voice of the unknown man and my 4 co-workers started to get further away. I passed the 4th floor and the 3rd. My legs wouldn't move as quick as I wanted them to because they were buckling from fear, and it took all my strength to not fall on my face. After I passed the 3rd floor, I could finally make out the ground floor shrouded in darkness. I didn't care that I'd left my co-workers. I could only feel pure terror, and I needed to get out of the building as soon as possible. That's when I felt the presence of a few people getting closer to me from behind. I heard maybe 4 or 5 people's footsteps clanging down the stairs, and they were coming down fast. They were all silent. They didn't let out a sound, almost as if their sole purpose was to catch up with me. I tried not to scream and ran down the stairs. On the ground floor, there's a fenced area for throwing out the trash, and the exit is right around this area. The door has a lock on it, but you have to punch a code into it to unlock it. By this time, the multiple presences I was feeling was right behind me. I did my best not to turn around, and in the darkness used my fingers as my guide to punch in the code. As I was trying to unlock the key with my trembling fingers, I felt a puff of air and a sound behind me. I couldn't really make out what it was or where it came from. Then I felt it again. A puff of air and the slight sound along with it. Someone was breathing behind me. I could feel a bunch of people breathe in all at the same time. Then, my co-workers started talking all at the same time. Hey, Takase,
It's
turn
so
around.
much fun,
Takase, I have something to show you. Hey, Takase, don't worry, just turn around. It's so
Takase.
funny. All of their voices were coming only from a few centimeters away, but not one of them actually touched my body. It was just their voices. Their voices sounded so happy and excited, doing their best to make me turn around. I heard someone scream. It was me. Whatever they were saying started to not make sense anymore, and I could just hear their laughter. I heard a click and felt something cold and hard fall into my hands. It was the lock. I had finally succeeded in unlocking it. I got goosebumps everywhere and reached to open the door. Just a few more meters and I'll be out onto the street. I took one step forward. The laughter stopped. And then I heard the unknown man's voice. Just his voice. And in his low voice, he said, loud and clear,
Hey,
I've never seen a ghost. I've never heard their voices. But I experienced something so scary when I was in middle school. I'm a female and my father passed away when I was 14, so I moved in with my mother. My grandfather died way before that, so it was just my grandmother, mother, and I. I was still in a state of shock from my father being taken from me that I had a difficult time getting used to my new environment. I was stressed and worried about my new school, but people knew my reasons for transferring mid-year and they were really nice to me. A girl named Satoko was especially nice. She shared her textbooks with me and was a great listener when I needed someone to talk to. As our friendship grew stronger, I naturally opened up to those around me, and after 2 months, I was laughing and joking around with others. There was a girl called Fumi in that class. She was really cute, the type of girl that even other females feel a certain amount of platonic attraction towards. She was petite and thin. I, on the other hand, was a bit darker and quite tall, so thinking back now, maybe there was a part of me that wished I was a bit more like her. I wanted to become better friends with her, and I guess my wishes came true because when the time of year came to rearrange our seats, I was put into the same group as her. We started talking more, and I found out that she was being raised by a single mother as well, and that common thread deepened our friendship. Fumi's dad had apparently had an affair and ran away with that woman. I felt lucky to find someone like her, someone in a similar situation as me and living without any male figures in their home. But that was short-lived. I don't remember the reason for my visit to her house. It was such a long time ago, but more than that, what I witnessed at her house was so terrifying that everything else that occurred that day is a complete blur. At the time of my visit, Satoko was also with me. Satoko was not the biggest fan of Fumi, and she didn't like that I had become close friends with her. Given this fact, I really don't know why she was even with me that day. Anyway, even though Fumi lived in the opposite direction, Satoko and I went over to her house after school one day. Her house was extremely old and dilapidated. It was made of wood, but the outside layer was beginning to peel off, curling back, looking as if it wanted nothing to do with the house. There was no garden to speak of, seeing that there was only about 50 centimeters or 19 inches between the neighboring houses. I was caught off guard, but felt ashamed to judge her. I mean, my grandmother's house was pretty old too, and it isn't easy for a single parent to raise a child. "Mum!" Fumi called out. Her mother came out from the back somewhere. She had deep creases in her face, but you could see that she was a beautiful woman. She gave Satoko and I an extremely deep bow. I guess she was taking in the washing because she had some towels and undergarments draped over her arm. "I'll bring you girls something to drink," she said rather excitedly. I thought back to the time she told me she didn't bring many friends over to her place. I thought maybe her room wasn't as neat or as girly as some might expect, considering her outward appearance. When she opened her bedroom door, though, it wasn't what I was preparing myself for. The room was just as pretty as Fumi herself. She had bright-colored curtains, she had cute plush toys sitting on her desk, and everything about her room was beautiful. Except for one thing. It was standing in the corner of the room and looking at us. A mannequin. It was a male mannequin. To this day, I can't forget the way it looked. Its arms were bent into a W shape and staring straight at us. It was just your average mannequin with the perfect face, but that made its stare look even more lifeless and dead. It was wearing a bright red hoodie and a cap. I noticed that the hoodie looked to be of much better quality than what Fumi's mother was wearing when she greeted us at the door. Satoko and I were just standing there speechless, but Fumi didn't seem fazed at all as she approached the mannequin and adjusted its cap. Seeing her do this gave me goosebumps. Fumi turned to us and said, "Isn't it handsome?" Maybe it was the way she said it. She said it in a very monotonous tone, and it irked me in a way that I can't explain. "Welcome to our home." Fumi's mum entered the room with some cake and tea on a tray. I felt like we'd been saved. Satoko must have felt the same way as she quickly reached out to help her. I went to help too when I realized that there were 4 plates in total and wondered whether Fumi's mum would be joining us for tea. Her mum took the 4th plate of cake and cup of tea and, smiling, placed them on Fumi's desk, which was right next to the mannequin. What the hell did I walk into? I thought to myself. Sweat trickled down my back as Fumi stared in the direction of the mannequin. I could only see the back of her head from where I was. She suddenly turned back to face us and started eating her cake as she passed the bowl of sugar to us. I wanted to ask her about the mannequin. It was obvious that they were treating it as if it was real. Not only that, but they were treating it like royalty, putting on what looked to be much more expensive clothes than their own and giving it cake and tea. But neither of them actually talked to it. What or who were they treating the mannequin as? If they really thought that it was a person, they'd probably refer to it as a he, but Fumi referred to it as an it just before. I wondered what she would say if I asked her about it, but I felt like no matter what she said, it would probably freak me out like hell, because this wasn't normal at all. I tried to think of something to talk about, so I asked her about the birdcage in the other corner of her room. I didn't want to touch the subject of the mannequin and focused on the Fumi that I knew from school. "Do you have a bird?" I asked. "It's not here anymore." "Oh, I'm sorry." I didn't want it anymore. It was a cold response that I wasn't expecting. She sounded like she didn't care about the bird one bit, and I just wanted to get out of that house. I felt like I would go crazy if I stayed any longer. Satoko said, "Hey, can I borrow your bathroom? Where is it?" "It's at the end of the hallway." Satoko almost ran out of the room, and I felt a pang of anger towards her for leaving me behind. I just stared down at my hands. It felt pointless to even try to bring up a conversation. After what felt like ages, I heard hurried footsteps in the hallway. Satoko poked her head in, her face drained of any color. "I'm sorry, we've got to go home now," she said to me. She didn't even glance at Fumi. "I see." "Welcome home," Fumi said. I almost fainted at those words. Satoko pulled on my hands to get me out of the house, but I felt like I should at least thank Fumi's mum, but I didn't want to actually see her. There was a 20-centimeter gap in the door at the back of Fumi's room, which led into another room, so I called out to say thank you. I'm surprised even to this day that I even had a voice. A hand came out of the gap and slammed the door shut. Satoko and I ran like hell out of that house. We jumped on our bikes and sped out of there like there was no tomorrow, with Satoko leading the way. When we reached a place that was far enough and we were back on our route home, we stopped pedaling and got a drink. We chugged the drink down and she said to me in a strong voice, "You've got to cut ties with her." I didn't need her to tell me that. She continued, "There's something wrong with that house, that family. Fumi's weird, but her mum's the one that's crazy." "Her mum?" I asked. And Satoko started to recount what happened when she went to the toilet. When she was walking down the hall towards the bathroom, she passed by a room and the door was ajar. She didn't think much of it and glanced into it as she went past. She saw a mannequin's hands and legs, 4 or 5 of them just strewn across the floor. Fumi's mum was kneeling on the floor and talking to one of those arms and giving it compliments like a crazed person. Satoko did what she had to do as quickly as possible, and when she was walking back towards Fumi's room, she couldn't help but look into the room again. Her eyes met with those of the mother's. She was just staring, her eyes blank. There was only folded laundry on the floor now. The mannequin's arms and legs were nowhere to be seen. In the laundry, she saw some men's underwear mixed in with it. Before she realized, she blurted out, "Where did the mannequin go?" Fumi's mum didn't say anything, but just smiled at her. It was right after this that Satoko ran back to the bedroom and pulled me out of there. It was such a creepy experience that unless Fumi talked to us first, we never initiated another conversation with her again. And of course, that drifted us apart. We wondered whether we should tell the other people at school about what we experienced, but we figured no one would believe us. They'd probably think that we were just trying to bully Fumi, especially because Satoko wasn't a big fan of hers from the start, and everyone knew it. Later, we heard of another girl that was invited to Fumi's house, so I asked her whether she saw anything weird when she was there. She gave me a quizzical look and told me everything was normal. But there was one boy who said he actually experienced something that was a bit off. He went to her house one day and rang the doorbell. She knew he was coming, but no one answered. He decided to wait when he thought maybe they were at the back of the house and couldn't hear the doorbell, so he opened the door and looked in. He could see straight into another room as the door was wide open. I'm not sure if it was the same room Satoko looked into, but he saw a man wearing a yukata sitting with his legs crossed, facing away from him. He could see flashes of light shining onto the man's back, so the TV must have been on, but the sound was muted. The boy called out to him a few times, but the man didn't turn around, nor did he move a muscle. After a while, the boy got a bit scared and he went home. If you can remember me saying just before, Fumi was being raised by a single mother and there weren't any men living with them. Even if the man that the boy saw was a relative or a friend, why did he have his back to the TV? Why didn't he respond? The men's underwear that Satoko saw, did it belong to this man? Maybe it was that mannequin, but I've never seen a mannequin sitting with its legs crossed. Do they even exist? If it does, then the one in Fumi's room must be a second mannequin. Do they have several of them in the house? I decided to not think about it anymore. It's been 14 years since this happened, so I can look back on it rather calmly and write it down. Even to this day, I have no idea what Fumi and her mum were up to. If they wanted to keep it a secret, then why didn't they try to hide it when Satoko and I went over that day? I just can't comprehend anything. I've also never seen a mannequin with its arms bent into a W shape. Not even to this day. 3 years ago, I went camping with my family. The campsite was on top of a cliff and there were stairs that led down to a beautiful beach. There were many campers that day, and I guess the beach was quite popular because there were lots of day visitors too. My younger brother was in his second year of middle school, so he was right in the middle of puberty. He didn't want to be there, but our dad forced him into the car and brought him with us. When it came time to enjoy the beach, he went off on his own. He swam out to the buoys floating in the distance. I went into the water around noon, and after about an hour, I saw that my brother was yelling out at me from the buoy. I took the rubber boat out and rowed over to him. His face had gone blue and he was shaking. Thinking it strange, I pulled him onto the boat. "What are you doing? Did you get a cramp or something?" I looked at his left arm and saw that he was bleeding profusely from it. A person, he stammered. He was shaking so bad and wasn't making sense, so I rowed back to the shore. We went up to the campsite with the help of our older brother and put him in the tent to rest after bandaging his arm. He had a wound that went through his entire arm and was about 2 centimeters in width. After he calmed down some, we asked him what had happened. He told us he was just holding onto the buoy and looking out when he saw a young kid hanging onto a different one a couple meters away from him. He wondered whether it was okay for such a small kid to be all the way out there by himself. As soon as that thought crossed his mind, he got a terrible feeling and felt like he needed to turn away. For some reason, he felt like he would die if his eyes met the kid's. This feeling kept getting stronger, and he shut his eyes tight. He was afraid to open them for fear of seeing the kid again, but he was too afraid to let go of the buoy and swim back to shore. So, he did the only thing he could, which was to yell at us from a distance in hopes that one of us would notice and come get him. He kept his eyes closed until he heard my voice approaching. He finally opened them when I got there, and when he did, he saw the kid hanging onto his left arm. Half of his face looked like it was melted, and his finger was digging into his skin. He said there was hair entangled all around his body, and without that buoy, he would have drowned and died for sure. When I pulled him up onto the boat, I didn't see any hair, and the wound on his arm went through and through. I only listened with half an ear and coughed it up to my brother falling asleep while he was out there. The wound on his arm was probably from some kind of fish or something. I've heard of some fish having sharp extremities, so it wasn't that far-fetched to think so. The wound didn't seem to get any better, even after 2 weeks. In fact, it was getting worse. It looked like it was infected, and his arm was starting to swell up. We finally took him to the doctor, where they took an x-ray. They saw that there was something inside, and that's why it was getting inflamed. The doctor didn't seem worried and told us he just needed a simple surgery to extract whatever was inside and that his arm would heal quickly after that. When the surgery was done, the doctor asked us, sorry for asking, but how exactly did you get injured? We looked at him with a puzzled look and said, Why? What's wrong? Well, the doctor replied, it's about what I found inside. And he brought a tray to us and showed us. What we saw was lots of tangled, long black hair and a bunch of fingernails that looked like they'd been torn off. My younger brother hasn't had any problems since this happened, but he absolutely refuses to go to the beach. I still can't believe his story completely, especially about the young kid he saw, but I was there when the doctor showed us what he extracted. It gives me shivers, and I still can't explain how it happened.